morning. Welcome to Orlando Matters. I'm Keith Landry. I hope your Saturday is a winner so far. What is not a winner is that budget battle that lingers in the nation's capital as President Obama and the Republican leadership clash over $85 billion in potential cuts that could go into effect on March 1st. You've been hearing this. It's called sequestration. And we're talking to Jason Edwards, who's a financial planner and a local economist with Edwards Financial Services in Winter Park. And you've been studying this thing the whole way. We've had you on since we were talking about the fiscal cliff months back. And it's just frustrating, the inability of our so-called leaders in the nation's capital to get something done.
Yeah, and that's probably the saddest part about it, because from a fundamental perspective, I mean, most of your viewers would agree that if they sat down and looked at their checkbook and every month they were spending more than they made, at some point the road would hit the pavement, so to speak, and you'd have a situation where you'd have to do something differently.
Sure. And
even with the sequestration that you referred to, the cut was basically a stop-loss provision that was put in place. Congress back in 2011 was talking about increasing the ceiling, what they call the debt ceiling. And they said, you know, we're going to have 2 years to discuss this, so let's put this as just a backup plan. So, you know, they had 2 more years to try to walk through the process of cutting spending, looking revenue sharing, looking at ways to deal with the deficit. And this was just, you know, the backup plan or the worst-case scenario, and even that's not enough to deal with the deficit.
They did it sort of like a budget bomb. Like, okay, we're going to put this budget bomb in here because this would be so bad that it'll force us to deal with it so it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
and they still haven't gotten there.
Yeah, and that's really the reality of it. But really what's unique about it is there's so much misinformation out there because both sides are using this as a political venue versus an economic venue. And that's really what it is. Sure. Economics 101. If you spend more money than you make, you're not a strong environment for growth. You're not a strong environment for purchasing. And you're not a strong environment economically. So even though it is a budget bomb, if you look at it percentage-wise, it's such a drop in the bucket.
Right. So we're talking about $85 billion compared to $16 trillion in our national debt.
Yeah, and to put the numbers in perspective for the viewers, what you're looking at is, let's say last month you spent over $1,000 more than you made, and you sat down with the wife and said, honey, we spent way too much money last month, $1,000 more. This month we'll only spend $950. I mean, you're looking at a 5% reduction. So it is a nominal cut in spending. It really doesn't have the impact I think people think it's going to have.
And so this is what scares me, is if we're at a point where the Obama administration and Congress can't agree on $85 billion in cuts, when the real problem is $16 trillion in debt, how do we ever hope to ever solve the problem?
Well, and that's the fundamental root of the issue. If you take a situation where people are spending more money than they make, the object is not to give them more money. The object is to try to cut spending, because obviously there's a spending problem. And the problem, unlike you or I, the federal government doesn't have a real budget. The reality is every time they put that line in the sand, all they do is increase the line further. So even though the money's not there, they continue to spend. If the fiscal bomb that you referred to actually was imploded and you had the sequestration situation for its fruition, that's only $1.2 trillion. So you're looking at $1.2 trillion over 10 years. Right now we're at $16 trillion. So imagine what the deficit would look like even with all of those cuts employed in a 10-year span. The reality of it is somebody has to step up and really look at it from an economics perspective of what's the best way to structure the economy so that our GDP numbers aren't in the 1 or 2% range.
Right.
They're at the 4 to 5% range, competing with other developing countries we see now that are doing 7 or 8%.
Then the tax base would grow and it would help to mitigate part of the program.
Well, and that's a great point. I mean, if you taxed everybody in the United States, the reality of it is the tax revenue isn't enough to keep up with the spending revenue. That's the problem. If you continue to spend at the rate you're spending, I don't care if you tax the entire country, you're never going to catch up with that deficit. So it has to be a combination of both.
So we must do cuts ultimately. And how do you do that in a way that doesn't slow the economy?
Well, you know, there's been a lot of economists. There was a great report from a local university that talked about even if the entire $85 billion took place this year, you're only talking about 1.5% in unemployment rate going up. GDP is only being impacted by 0.5%. So that sounds like a lot, but the reality of it is you have the Band-Aid approach where you pull the Band-Aid off slow, it hurts, and you continue to complain about it, or you pull it off fast, which allows you to get past that point and move forward. I think the reality of it from a GDP perspective is a strong, robust economy is when companies feel sure about what's taking place. They hire employees. Employees go back to work, and they spend money in the local economies that they live in. That's the only way you get the thing going in the right direction.
So folks are hearing about this $85 billion in cuts, but if sequestration happens, there'll be more painful cuts, another round of them coming up.
Well, not only that, but there's also a misconception of what will be cut. For example, in the state of Florida, you know, we talk about loss of jobs. The 3 states that will be hit the hardest will be Virginia, will be Texas, and will be California. But Florida will stand to lose maybe about 70,000 to 79,000 jobs. However, if you look at it in the bigger scheme of things, the job replacement opportunities could be there, because now if you're cutting debt, you've got more revenue for other programs. And other basic programs are not cut. For example, veteran affairs programs won't be cut, Medicaid won't be cut, Social Security, food stamps, low-income programs. Those are excluded from sequestration. So there are a lot of things that people, I think, don't know about what's going to take place if it happened. But more than likely, you know and I know what will happen is they'll probably kick the can down another year, and we'll be discussing it in 2014.
Unbelievable. And we'll discuss this more after a quick commercial break. We got to go to break here real quick.